The Edmonton Oilers goalie room is a puzzle with no easy answers. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, how we're going to make do with less.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming NHL season will be my 10th doing digital hockey content, my 4th as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every single day. And on today's show, everyone's favorite subject, the Edmonton Oilers goalie room. So today's show is broken up into 3 segments. As always, our opening segment, we will talk about Stuart Skinner from a narrative perspective and from a statistical perspective. Our second segment, same deal for Calvin Pickard, narrative and statistics. Our final segment, we'll talk about guys who aren't presently with the organization, which one I think makes more sense, and tie a bow on what has been a very awkward offseason for the goalies. Because we can be frank, we can be candid. This goalie room is not inspiring confidence. And there is a pocket of Oiler fans who think it was an organizational failure that they did not at least try to upgrade one of these 2 spots. I was very adamant early in the offseason that they should have signed a third goalie, whether that was Alex Lyon, Alexander Georgiev, if they wanted to go a little higher up, if they wanted to trade for somebody. The Oilers did have options in front of them. But now, going into the 2025-2026 season, there is no ambiguity. This is the last dance for this goalie room. After this upcoming season, both Skinner and Pickard are unrestricted free agents. I can go out on a limb here, and not much of a limb. I think this is pretty safe to say. The Oilers will not be bringing both guys back next summer. I think almost certainly the Oilers are going to need to introduce some new blood to this position group. Now, I am not one for playing prospects when it comes to goalies, especially for a team that is in the weeds like the Oilers are. I don't think they would be particularly inclined to give a prospect goalie 30 to 40 starts next year, even in a true tandem with Stuart Skinner. So we need to frame ourselves around this idea that this is the last chance Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard are going to have in Edmonton for now. Of course, should this upcoming season be unfamiliar, should the Oilers goaltending room be a position of strength, I think there's a conversation to be had about what changed environmentally, or one of my favorite words, if it was an outlier season, which is absolutely possible that Stuart Skinner going into a contract year, he pulls a Darnell Nurse. He puts together a .910 save percentage, a 2.5 or 6 goals against, like a 7 or 8 goals saved above expected. Nothing insane, but better than he's done, and just enough that he entices Stan Bowman to give him a contract extension. Because at face value, Stuart Skinner's numbers are pretty mediocre. A .905 save percentage, a 2.72 goals against average, and a 9.87 goals saved above expected. And real quick, on goals saved above expected, this is a means of qualifying or quantifying how difficult Stuart Skinner's workload is. So, based on the expected goals he faced over the last 4.5 seasons where he's played, he did get in 1 game in that 5th season, but his average goal saved above expected is 9.87. So, an expected goalie who makes the only saves they're supposed to would be 0. He has saved 9.87 goals saved above expected on average over the course of his 3.5-4 seasons as an NHL starter. That is going to be in the lower echelon. And I don't think people are going to be surprised to hear what I say next, but Stuart Skinner's probably not one of the 32 best goalies in the world. And that is an awkward position to be in if you're Skinner, because as we know, Linus Ullmark can attest to this, Connor Hellebuyck can attest to this, the perception of goalies is largely rooted to their win-loss record. Linus Ullmark winning the Vezina Trophy a couple of years ago for the Bruins, the year they won the President's Trophy, that was largely a byproduct of team success. One can make an argument, Jeremy Swayman had better numbers on that same Bruins team, but he didn't play as many games, so there's context. I think Connor Hellebuck winning the Hart Trophy this past year as league MVP, not a coincidence. That comes in conjunction with the team winning the President's Trophy as well. The Vezina Trophy is voted on by general managers. We know general managers are not always the best arbiters of talent. Whenever you read some of these anonymously sourced articles talking about the best players in the world, there's always crazy quotes attributed to GMs about players who aren't all of that good, who get caught up in hype moments, who get caught up in aura. And I think Stuart Skinner is really a victim of his own success. And I've used that phrase quite a bit this offseason. My everydayers have heard me say that a lot. The Oilers were not expecting Stuart Skinner to save their bacon the way he did 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They signed Jack Campbell that first day of free agency with the expectation that he was going to be the bell cow starter, that he was going to start 50 to 60 games for them for the next few seasons, and they would hopefully bring along a prospect goalie in conjunction with him. The Oilers were never expecting Stuart Skinner to play as well as he did in Jack Campbell's stead during that 2022-2023 season. Then, one more time, they tried to put the tires back on Jack Campbell in going into 23-24. I wouldn't say that was ultimately what got Jay Woodcroft fired, but it certainly didn't help because Jack Campbell was broken. And the Oilers, I think, and I don't think this is a coincidence, I think the Oilers are a little gun shy when it comes to the goalie market because of their experience with Jack Campbell, because of their experience with Mikko Koiskinen, with Mike Smith, with Cam Talbot. And look, some of that is workload. I don't think it's a coincidence Cam Talbot started 72 games, the last goalie who will probably ever start more than 70 games in a season, and then had a decline, then had a physical decline. And look, Talbot's still a passable NHL goalie at this stage of his career, but it is a curiosity to think about what could have been if they had managed Talbot a little more responsibly that first season, what the runway from there looked like. And instead of focusing on these 1 or 2 year stopgaps, genuinely trying to solve the position long term. And look, I'll be fair. Ken Holland tried to do that with Jack Campbell. It didn't work. They quickly realized it and they admitted their mistakes. So they get credit for that. And I do have to give credit for that because some GMs are stubborn. Some general managers, some decision makers, they will stubbornly see a bad signing through to the end because they can't admit they were wrong, because they care too much about saving face. They care too much about how they're perceived. And that type of intellectual honesty is a challenge to admit you were wrong. But I do think ultimately it's a sign of an accountable organization. And as a fan, as a content person, as somebody who is trained in journalistic ethics, that's accountability. If I make a mistake on the show, I got to come out and tell you guys. Otherwise, I'm not credible. Otherwise, I'm not accountable. And it's not as good of a show. It's important that people in positions of authority, experts or pseudo experts, give you reasons to trust them. It's not just enough that they have their word or that they've read some Wikipedia articles. Are you in the trenches? Are you doing the statistical analysis? Do you admit when you make mistakes? And it's important teams do. And Stuart Skinner is a fortunate mistake. The Oilers, by virtue of the team around him, have gotten to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals with him. And an argument can be made, if he were slightly better in either of those finals, maybe you go the other way. Maybe some of those games go the other way and you win the whole thing. And then we're having a very different story because that's all it takes. Aiden Hill, Jordan Binnington, those guys, they'll have jobs basically forever because they won their 1 Stanley Cup. And some guys are able to parlay that a little better. Darcy Kemper's put together a nice career. Braden Holtby got a couple chances after leaving Washington, winning a cup there. He also had a Vezina to his name, to be fair. But this position is undoubtedly the hardest to evaluate in hockey. It is so environmentally dependent. The Oilers have given Stuart Skinner a pretty favorable environment in the aggregate over the course of his time as their starter. The Oilers need more to be more consistent. They can get by with what they presently have, but if they genuinely want to project Stanley Cup contender status and for an extended period of time, this starter needs to be better. And maybe Skinner, by virtue of the last dance nature of this season, kicks it into gear and takes a step. But more likely than not, he'll be between 905 and 910. He'll be somewhere 2.6, 2.7 goals against, hopefully 7 or 8 goals saved above expected. And none of that is flashy. None of that is incredible. But with the team that should be in front of him, It should be enough to get them to the playoffs, and it should be enough to keep them in most playoff series. Of course, the playoffs are an entirely different beast, as Connor Hellebuck himself can attest to, but we are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, speaking of playoff success, we'll talk about Calvin Pickard, the narrative, and dive into his numbers and why this, more likely than not, is Calvin Pickard's last stop in the NHL right after this. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's where our friends at Monarch Money come in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances or you're anxious about the reality, Monarch is here for you. Monarch does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money. And Monarch Money promises you will never touch a spreadsheet. Monarch made me aware I wasn't saving as much as I needed to, whether it was for big purchases so I didn't have to finance them like these headphones or a trip. Monarch has gave me actionable plans to make them happen. So do not let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this midweek Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are getting ever so close to the start of preseason games and the eventual season. We're about 3.5 weeks away from the start of the actual season, October 7th or 8th, whatever it is, that second full week of October. And as part of the ramp up, we're continuing our positional group conversations through this week. Monday, we talked about the forwards. Yesterday, the defense. Today, the goalies. Tomorrow, we'll hit the power play. Friday, we'll hit the penalty kill. And I like doing these discussions and these dives because it makes me put context around these numbers. It's not just looking at the numbers. It's more what the numbers say. And when it comes to Calvin Pickard, I say this with respect. This guy got lucky. It is unbelievable that Calvin Pickard has played as much as he has over the last 2 seasons because, to be fair, he was out of the NHL for a really long time. Like, I'm going to click over to his stats here real quick because I want to get the number right. For his average NHL season, Calvin Pickard starts 15 NHL games. He started almost 30 last year. Do you understand how much of a significant jump that is? Calvin Pickard got into 36 games last year. He started 31. Calvin Pickard's career average starts in a season prior to last year was 14. We're talking about 20 more games than average. That is a massive jump in responsibility and workload. And it's not a coincidence. The last time Calvin Pickard started more than 30 games in a season was 2017-2018 for the Colorado Avalanche when they were one of the worst teams in the entire NHL. Calvin Pickard is a journeyman goalie. And I can, as somebody who loves hockey deeply, we can romanticize the journeyman backup. Somebody who's been in half the organizations in the NHL, who's bounced to Europe, who's been in the AHL, who's been a bell cow starter, 30, 45, 50 starts in the AHL in your late 20s, early 30s. A lot of guys give up. And Calvin Pickard deserves credit for that, sticking with it into your late 20s and into your 30s as an AHL goalie. There are a lot of guys who don't have that mental toughness, who don't have that resolve to gut it out in the national at that point. There are a lot of guys who get past that first or second contract and they still haven't really stuck at the NHL level, or in Pickard's case, somebody who was in the NHL for a couple of years. A lot of guys don't have that mentality of, okay, I will work my way back here. I will find a way to get back here. A lot of guys, if they have 3 or 4 years at the NHL level and are then sent to the AHL or can only get offered an AHL contract, they don't have the patience. They don't have the resolve. They don't have the determination. Let me tell you, life in the A as an old head is not the most glamorous thing in the world. You are riding buses. You are not getting paid nearly what your NHL salary would be, and you are grinding it out for a chance. And when you're a goalie, it's a little different because if you have to get slipped through waivers from the end to the NHL to the AHL, you can delude yourself to some degree that, hey, someone might claim me. Teams always need a goalie. There's always going to be injuries because teams can only afford to carry two in reality against the salary cap. Should a goalie get injured, teams immediately are tapped in on that waiver wire, and goalies have to go through because this situation arises where you have guys who are underperforming, who need to play at the AHL level, who do not have the privilege of being waiver free anymore and have to clear, and they will get claimed. And Pickard is a really nice story, and I feel that he has given them what he can. And my big barometer, something in life, this is not just sports. And I get this from Friday Night Lights, the movie, where Coach Gaines is talking to the team, and did you do everything you could to look your friends, your family, the people you care about? If you can tell them you gave it your best and you still lost, that's okay. And it is important to understand that. And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with to some degree, the fear of failure and the idea that, no, I have to be successful. I have to be successful. To eventually be successful, you do need to fail first. And Tom Brady talks about this a lot, that the reason he likes football so much, that he thinks everybody should play football, is because football is hard, because football will challenge you. Football will challenge you to get better. And a lot of people don't have that in them. But the greats, they find a way to get there, to answer that, to come back, to bounce back. And in the case of Pickard, there's a non-zero chance this is the last NHL hockey he ever plays. He is not egregiously old for a goalie. Guys can play into their late 30s, even their early 40s at this position, just by the nature of it. But with his sample size, with his workload, with where the Oilers are at organizationally, it wouldn't shock me that after this year Pickard retired, or if Pickard went to Europe, or Pickard signed an AHL contract after this. I'm not convinced Calvin Pickard is one of the 64 best goalies in the world. I think he has been fortunate to play on the Oilers the last 2 years, who are good enough in front of him that he doesn't need to do a whole lot other than not be egregiously bad. His career numbers are very, very average, talking about a .903 save, a 2.89 goals against, a negative goal saved above expected. And he's on average only facing 26 shots on goal per game, something we've talked about quite a bit, especially last year during the regular season, the difference in performance from the team in front of him versus the team in front of Skinner, where Pickard's facing 2 or 3 fewer shots on goal per game than Skinner was. And it raises the quandary. I mean, the team always plays better in front of the backup goalie. That's human psychology at play, not necessarily a conscious decision that, oh, Pix is in there, we got to play better. No, those guys have it in their hearts and they know, okay, Pix is in there, we got to bail him out. We got to look out for him because we know he doesn't have as much as Skinner does. And look, that's a very fickle scale. There is not a huge gap between these guys, but I do think teams know when their backup goalies in that they have more of a responsibility to play responsibly. And I think the Pickard they've gotten in the postseason each of the last 2 years is worthy of commendation as well. I think we also can't be too romanticized by the narrative, which is something we have to walk the line of in sports, where especially I think the talking heads, the national media people, they get too married to the narrative. And it influences their perception of results, and it leads to disingenuous commentary. Or I think it leads to people not caring about the results enough. You know, it's awesome Pickard has come in the playoffs each of the last 2 years and played a pivotal role in getting them to the Stanley Cup final. But by and large, this is a environmental team where all the goalie needs to do is not stink, and that's enough. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why, even though Ilya Samsonov and Carter Hart are out there, I don't know if you really want either of those guys. Right after this. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however I want to play easy. If you want to ride player props, if you want to put together a same game parlay, or if you're watching the game and you think something crazy is about to happen, like Baker Mayfield's comeback against the Texans on Monday Night Football, you can jump in with live betting. Tomorrow night, we've got Tua's last stand, the Dolphins going up to Buffalo as 11.5-point road underdogs. You've got an interesting AFC West game, Broncos-Chargers, Chargers 2.5-point favorites. The Cowboys and the Bears, the Cowboys 1.5-point road underdogs at the Bears, who've lost 2 games by almost 50 combined points. Something worth thinking about. So, FanDuel has one question. Are you ready? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet for your chance at $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are walking through the Oilers goalie room. And I have not spent a lot of time talking about Carter Hart. Candidly, I have no interest in Carter Hart. Journalistically, I have a responsibility to the audience to tell you why. And I will be upfront. The morality of this situation is bad. The Oilers, Stan Bowman, Evander Kane, Corey Perry, there are a sliding scale of things here. And it is important we talk about them in the context of actors in situations, what we know, what we don't know, what standards are, ethical versus legal. And I'm going to be very frank with you. Carter Hart is a narrative goalie. Putting aside the very serious moral quandary about bringing in a player who has those allegations against him. And yes, I know the charges were ultimately not pursued in court. They were dismissed. I do not think they should be taken lightly. And that's my opinion. I do not think those should be taken lightly. I can personally tell you it makes me uncomfortable. Now, you might be different. You might be thinking, well, if the Oilers are as desperate as you say they are, Nick, why aren't you that interested? Well, since you asked, thankfully, Carter Hart's stats kind of stink. 16-16-5, average of 38 starts, 906 save, which is 1 point better than Skinner's career average, but 2.94 goals against average. That number's worse. Skinner's goals against average is 2.72. Hart's is 2.94. And yes, some of that is a byproduct of being on god-awful Flyers teams where the defense was non-existent. The forward group was untalented. I'm not ignorant of that. He has a negative goal saved above expected for his career average. That's not particularly impressive. And I get it. Carter Hart had a lot of pedigree. He had a lot of hype as an amateur goalie, somebody who thought would be the heir to Carey Price for the net for Team Canada, somebody who had the one really good postseason for the Flyers in the bubble when they got to the second round and ultimately lost to, I think, the Islanders, if I remember correctly. And then I don't remember who Tampa Bay beat on the other side of the bracket. Maybe Boston, but that's neither here nor there. Carter Hart hasn't played professional hockey in a year and a half, almost 2 full seasons. He is somebody that hasn't had a good NHL season in a while. He is somebody who is going to draw extra attention, who is going to add to this environment. The numbers are not impressive. The stigma that comes with signing a guy like that, especially having Stan Bowman as the general manager, that is another thing that weighs on this. And you can say that's not fair, and that's your opinion. You are perfectly entitled to say, Nick, that yeah, it's not fair. The charges were dismissed. Okay. I do not want a guy like that on my team. The numbers are not particularly good. You are allowing yourself to get talked into the narrative. Remember what we had said before in the last segment, that there are some insiders who allow, or media people who allow themselves to be too romanticized by the narrative, that they become ignorant of the results. Yes, Carter Hart at one point was a highly touted prospect. He has had flashes of good NHL performance. He has a real ethical stigma to him. He has not played in a number of years, and his numbers are not particularly impressive. That's 3 strikes against him. that is more than enough for me to say I'm good on that. I know there's been reports he's really not interested in signing with a Canadian team. He wants to try and stay out of the firestorm that would come with signing with a Canadian team, because Canadian media takes hockey more seriously than down here in the States, where he would almost assuredly be asked ridiculous questions by Paul Bissonnette about how it feels to be back in the NHL. But that's neither here nor there. The other goalie that comes to mind in this conversation, we've talked about quite a bit, someone over the last few weeks, is Ilya Samsonov. And Alexander Georgiev signed with the Sabres last week, somebody who had a really rough go of it last year in Colorado, melted down, got traded to the Sharks, played even worse on the Sharks than he did on the Avs. That is the caliber of player that is available out there at this point. I think Ilya Samsonov is a conduit type goalie. I think he's very similar to what Stuart Skinner is, in the respect that if everything's going well around him, he's going to be able to hold it together. Samsonov has a couple decent NHL seasons under his belt at a few different stops. And look, I'm not saying he's a Vezina caliber goalie, but he's got a .919 save percentage in there. He's got a .913 in there. He's got a .902. Those are respectable. .913 and .919 are nothing to sneeze at. 22 starts, .913 save, 40 starts, .919 save on Toronto. And again, that's on a Capitals team that was really good at his rookie season. And then on a Vegas team that was on a Toronto team that was pretty good. So those numbers are environmental. They tell you that, hey, if everything around this guy is okay, he's a passable NHL goalie. And I think, and I have said this for a few weeks now, it's at least worth a conversation. And look, we know what Stan Bowman thinks. The devil you know is better than the one you don't. He thinks he would rather roll the dice with Skinner, that Chris Knoblauch knows what buttons to push, that he's going to be able to get good performances out of him. And the variance that would come with introducing a new goalie to this room, well, can you clear Pickard through waivers to get him back to the AHL to hold on to him if something bad happens? I don't know. Can you? There are real questions to be had here about how they could go about this. And I'm a big believer in competition. I think anytime a team puts a player in a position where they have a fake competition, like the Giants did a couple years ago with Tyrod Taylor and Daniel Jones, you want to give guys a real chance to play. The problem here is you can't do that with Pickard and Skinner. Pickard can't start 50 games. He can't. Physically, Calvin Pickard cannot start 50 games at this point in his NHL career. I just do not think he would be able to do it. That means, by default, Stuart Skinner is going to get the majority of the starts, and what that means for your team. I think, as we have long said, if I ever start selling Locked On Oilers merch, the t-shirt will say, be a guy, not the guy. And that's what it is for Skinner. Don't lose them the game, and most of the time, that's good enough. When you get to the playoffs and you play teams that are better than you or have an equal amount of talent, that's not good enough, and that's where teams start to separate against Edmonton. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night ahead of the start of the season to be ready. I will talk to you guys tomorrow, where we will talk about the Oilers power play. Until then, let's go Oilers.